Rudi's Common Sense. Today, we're going to focus on, for me, one of the biggest surprises that I've had in this case in which I am representing the Trump campaign. And there have been many surprises. But I was absolutely shocked to learn that many, if not all, of our ballots are calculated outside of the United States of America. In the state of Michigan, for example, the state of Arizona, the state of Georgia, the calculations are handled by a company called Dominion. They have the machines. They have a reputation of being, well, I guess the best way to say it is the state of Texas turned them down because they were not considered competent enough to handle elections in Texas. And when I tell you their real history, I think you'll be quite shocked that we used them at all for elections. But in any event, Dominion doesn't really count the votes. Dominion has a contract with a company called Smartmatic. And Smartmatic has locations in Frankfurt, Germany, and in Barcelona, Spain. So when the votes are being calculated, they are sent to, most of them in this particular election, Frankfurt, I believe, but there may have been some sent to Barcelona, Spain. Those votes are also in machines, devices that are extremely vulnerable to hacking and extremely vulnerable to manipulation. Now, let me tell you the history of Smartmatic, because when you hear it, you're not going to believe it, and you're going to have to go check what I say by Googling it if they haven't removed all of this already. Smartmatic is a company whose origins go back to somewhere around 2004, 2005. It was founded by two Venezuelans, and two Venezuelans that were very close to the dictator in Venezuela, Chavez. And it was founded for the specific purpose of being able to fix elections. That's right. The company that is calculating many of our votes in 27 states, the company that's using the software to count those votes, was founded for the specific purpose of fixing elections. If you want to check that out, go online and look at the Sequoia case in Chicago. We'll explain it in a little while. And look at the testimony and the letter from Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who happens to be my representative in Congress, where I live in New York, and her concerns about Smartmatic going back to 2007, 2008, as a Venezuelan company that had a very terrible reputation for fixing elections. Well, they were founded for the specific purpose of making sure that Chavez was elected and reelected, really reelected, and also then used in Argentina at least once or twice in order to make sure that the election was fixed in the way that Chavez wanted it fixed. The place in which this all was exposed was during the 2007 election in Chicago, in which Sequoia, a company named Sequoia, was counting the ballots in Chicago. There was a tremendous amount of confusion. The result of the election was delayed, and there was a great deal of concern with the voting machines. No one really had focused really focused on where these voting machines had come from. But the voting machines came from and were embedded with software from Smartmatic, again, outside the country. And when they did the investigation, they found this whole history of Smartmatic, that Sequoia was really a front for Smartmatic, the way Dominion is a front for Smartmatic. And Detroit used them in this particular election, for example, and a lot of Michigan used it in this particular election, without apparently taking a look at their history. And their history right here in the United States, including the election they did in Chicago, is as a company that has been extremely, number one, extremely ineffective, a lot of mistakes, but number two, suspected of directly interfering in elections, because that was the whole purpose for their origin. And that's the company that we used to collect our ballots. Now, how do we find out about this? We found out about it because they apparently made a big mistake. Usually, according to the evidence that we have so far, and I think we're going to have quite a bit more, the way Smartmatic fixes an election is to very subtly change votes. So there isn't some big change in any one particular voting place. So let's say you want to make up 50,000 votes in the city of New York. So you don't do it in one place. You don't do it in two places, three. They use an algorithm in which they spread it out across the city. So they can get you a 2 or 3% difference over your opponent. This is their formula that they used in Venezuela. This is the formula they use in Argentina. This is the formula they're known for. That is executed by the Smartmatic algorithms and the Smartmatic software, which, as I said, originates from Venezuela. In other words, we're using a Venezuelan system to calculate the votes in the United States. We're using a system that originates from a dictatorship, maybe one of the worst in the world, as the core of our vote calculation, and a company whose expertise is subtle changes in votes, so they're not noticed, so they're not too many anomalies in the vote return. Now, of course, like anything else, Smartmatic and Dominion are not perfect, and they weren't perfect in Antrim County, Michigan. In Antrim, all of a sudden, on election day, or when the returns came in from the machine, Biden was ahead. It made no sense because all the Republicans down-ticketed won, and Trump had won that county, I've forgotten by what percentage, but a very large percentage in 2016. And he won the counties around it, similar places around it by big margins. Well, it turned out that, among other things, in one particular machine, they had switched, Dominion had, and Smartmatic, which is the ultimate software, had switched 6,000 votes. It switched 6,000 votes from Trump to Biden. So the poor people of Michigan that went in to vote for Trump ended up voting for Biden because the machine and the software that originates, with Venezuela, the dictatorship, changed their vote without their ever knowing it. Now, had they not been so piggish in that county, we never would have caught them. If it had been a difference of 2,000, 1,200, it would have been hard to catch. And that's what they usually do because they're very smart and very crafty. So now we're looking for anomalous results in other parts of the country. We have some very, very good leads where they've changed votes. We're probably not going to get too many because they do it in a way that's very, very careful. But one of the other things they do is they warn you when you're falling too far behind when the count is going on. So I don't know if you remember this, but on election night, there was a period of time in which it looked like Trump was going to win by an unexpectedly large margin. He was ahead in he was ahead in Pennsylvania by between 700,000 and 800,000 votes, with 65% of the vote cast. Normally, when we used to have a fair and decent media, that would have been called for him, because they weren't going to call anything for him until they called enough for Biden, rightly or wrongly, that would make him the winner. Like they get to decide who wins. Somebody should remind them it's the Electoral College that decides who wins, not NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox, or any of the rest of them. But in any event, they didn't call it for Trump, even though normally that would be called for someone with a 700,000 to 800,000 lead. Also, he had a very, very substantial lead in Wisconsin. I think it was 8-9%, something like 85% of the vote cast. He had a 300,000 vote lead in Michigan, again with 85% of the vote cast. He had 2.5% lead in Georgia, and North Carolina. Now, that isn't as great, but we were at 90%, and it's usually, I remember when I won the mayoralty, I was at 2.5% with 85% of the vote cast, and they called the election for me. Let's take a short break. So it looked pretty good. He was ahead almost everywhere, even in Virginia, where no one expected him to be ahead. And of course, it was too early to tell about Arizona, which was called immediately by Fox for Biden, which of course was a very bad call because it took a week to figure out the margin. And the margin now is about 8,000 votes. It's like that. And it could easily be wrong. By the way, it is wrong. And we'll prove that not only with evidence about Dominion, may not be able to get specific evidence of that on the machines, but I'll tell you what we can do. We can show that there were many, many absentee and mail-in ballots that were not inspected at all by Republicans, that were just put in behind our backs. And remember, when it's a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, there's only one point at which you can verify the ballot. That's when it's being counted, because it gets separated from the envelope that verifies it. Once you look at it, you say, okay, it gets put in the vote pile, the envelope gets put in the other pile, there's nothing that connects them together, and you lose that for eternity. It can't be rechecked. It can't be recounted. You can't go back and look at the machine. That's why the recounts, when you can't link the envelope to the ballot, are meaningless. And that's why there's such a strong emphasis on making certain that both sides get a chance to see that ballot. We've never had an election where we had this kind of pervasive, nationwide problem with that. Absentee ballots happen all the time. Politically, they become the source of disputes between the two sides. But I've never heard of so many instances where hundreds of thousands, and now it goes over 1 million, absentee ballots were counted by just one side. Republicans had no chance to see the ballot. That's outrageous. It's outrageous. And in many of these states, that number far exceeds Biden's small margin of victory. Those ballots should be declared null and void. They should be taken out of the count. And if that happens, and I believe it will, you're going to see at least 3 or 4 of these states, if not all of them, flip. Because the number of illegal ballots far exceeds the small lead that Biden has. In addition, the Dominion part is being investigated, and every day a mountain of evidence is coming in about statistical anomalies. And I expect soon there'll be even more targeted evidence of the fraud carried out by Dominion. I'll give you another example of how you can prove this. In Michigan, and concentrated in the Democrat areas of Michigan, there were many districts in which there was an overvote. What's an overvote? An overvote is, there are some districts in which 150% of the people in the district voted, or 200%. There's even one where 300% of the people in the district voted. What does that mean? That means they're not real people. You can't have over 100% of the people in the district voting. It means they're either from some other district or they're completely phony ballots. So if you have a district with 2,000 people and you have a 200% overvote, all those overvotes are fraudulent ballots that have to be taken out of the count. And when you look at Michigan, that number alone can wipe out all of the Biden lead and turn it around to a Trump victory. I don't know how in good conscience in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, I have no idea how anybody could, in good conscience, certify the vote, because the vote count right now is completely fraudulent. Completely. And I don't know if there are penalties of perjury for signing off on a vote count that's fraudulent. There should be. In every one of those states, there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of ballots that were put in secret. Only a Democrat observer and a Democrat official, and maybe just a Democrat official, even without a Democrat observer, looked at the ballot to verify it. That's completely contrary, not only to the law, I think the way in which they carried it out nationally is unconstitutional. It's a violation of the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution. A candidate for president is entitled to fair treatment. Also entitled to the same treatment the other side gets. That's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. Well, how can this not be a violation of due process and equal protection if, in fact, the ballots that are being counted do not allow for any inspection by the Republican side? They're counted by Democrats, and the only other inspection, if any, is done by a Democrat. And there are more than enough ballots like that in each one of these states to change the result from Biden to Trump, which says to me that they really didn't make up those numbers on election night. They didn't make up 700,000 or 800,000 votes in Philadelphia. Well, they did make it up. They made it up with phony ballots. They didn't catch up and pass him in Wisconsin, where he was leading by 8 or 9% with 85% in. No, what they did was they put in mail ballots, and they wouldn't let Republicans examine them. And they did it with a very, very deliberate, fraudulent plan, the Democrats did. They used cities that they completely control. They didn't do it in neutral cities, or Republican cities certainly, or they didn't even do it in cities that are moderately Democrat cities. They did it in cities they completely control. Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee. Just think about this, right? Those are places in which Philadelphia is legendary for voter fraud. I looked at the list of people convicted in the last 2 years in Philadelphia of voter fraud. It's almost the same as the number of people arrested, every week at a Eagles game for beating people up, because they have a jail right in the football stadium. I mean, I love Philadelphia as a city, and as many people say, some of my best friends are in Philadelphia. One of my closest friends was a judge in Philadelphia. But that doesn't stop me from telling you that their voter fraud process is legendary. In fact, the biggest surprise I would have is that they didn't cheat in this election. Well, boy, did they cheat. They had to make up 700,000 votes, and they did. And they did it by excluding Republicans completely from observing any ballot. Couldn't observe not a single ballot. Now, why would you do that? Why would you do that in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, in Detroit, in Milwaukee, in Minneapolis, in Las Vegas, Nevada, in Phoenix, Arizona, in Atlanta, Georgia? Why would you do that? Why would you just uniformly exclude Republicans? And why would you do it in every one of those? Every single one of them had that idea by themselves? That had to come from some central source. And why didn't it happen elsewhere? Because those are the places where they can get away with it. Those are the places where they completely control the election board. Those are the places where they can even get the sheriff to threaten people with arrest just for exercising their rights, which happened in several cases. Those are the places where they can really be goons and push people around and have no consequences. And those are the places where they have a fair number of crooked judges. That's just the reality. So they picked the places where they thought they had immunity. Well, like most crooks who get too ambitious and too greedy, because I think what happened is President Trump was ahead by way too much. They didn't anticipate have to make up 700,000 in Philadelphia and very large numbers in Michigan and all these other places. they got really sloppy. And that's how we caught them. And they had to exclude all the Republicans from the count, which makes it invalid just to start with. We have evidence of ballots being brought in the middle of the night that look like they were just written off. They come in ash cans, paper bags, cardboard boxes. Let's take a short break. And now let's get back to the analysis. So you put together the two things. Each one of those states, all the ballots that were put in secretly, without Republican inspectors, only with a Democratic office holder looking at it, maybe a Democrat inspector, no Republican. Those ballots violate both the due process and the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. The numbers are much greater than the margin, and they have to be thrown out. And then when you do the certification should justly be awarded to the person who leads by a substantial amount based on the legitimate ballots that follow the law, that weren't struck off in somebody's back garage working as a Democratic operative in Detroit, Michigan, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or wherever. And then, most importantly, I want you to remember, because this goes beyond this election, we should never have the votes in the United States sent to a foreign country. I'm shocked that we were doing it. Even a friendly country like Canada, where I think we thought they were going. We're capable of counting votes here in America. So we can have discipline. We can be sure our enemies aren't involved in it. Here, we have a company that's controlled by Venezuelans who support Maduro, one of the worst dictators in the hemisphere, one of the biggest enemies of the United States, one of the people that would, more than anything, want to see Donald Trump out of office. Shouldn't happen. Votes should be counted in the United States. If we learn anything from this pervasive voter fraud that I believe is going to overturn an election and put it in the right column, but in any event, whatever we learn from it, what has to emerge from it is never, ever again should our votes be counted outside of the United States of America. So they become really completely unable to discipline, to secure, to make sure they're done validly, to make sure there aren't formulas that are used to switch the vote by 2-3%, or formulas that are used to warn you if you should put in illegal ballots. So keep following it. The evidence on that part of this investigation is just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, meaning the counting of ballots and the manipulation of ballots and the calculation of ballots outside the United States. There's much more evidence than I've been able to describe, and there are some things that I haven't been able to tell you. But over the course of the next couple of weeks, I think the foreign aspect of this and the national security aspect of this will become bigger and bigger and bigger. With regard to the votes, the pure votes, that's already done. In every one of the states that I mentioned, every one of the swing states, every one of the states where they utilized a crooked Democrat city to carry out the voter fraud, there are more than enough fraudulent ballots that have now been discovered to overturn the vote in that crooked city and to change the result in the state based on legitimate votes from Biden to Trump. And for the good of this republic, that has to happen, because you shouldn't be allowed to do this. Well, thank you very much. And we'll be back very shortly, I'm sure, with even a more detailed description of this fraud, which is growing and growing and growing in terms of evidence every day. Thank you.